would love to kick this off just by having you tell everybody, myself included, who you are and your story. You can start from as early as you like. I was really excited when I first met you and heard your story. So if you could tell everyone, that'd be great.
Okay. Wow, that's a big, like, when do I start? Everybody usually tries to start me somewhere. So I'll start with, I'm an Army brat. I grew up living all over everywhere. And that was, born in California, high school in Heidelberg, Germany, got to go to prom in a castle. Very cool. Went to school at the University of Michigan, and I was on a full ride ROTC program for the Air Force. So then I also went into the military. So my life has been one of a nomad, kind of been all over everywhere. Also been one focused around service. I'm actually 15th generation military in my family, one of 5. So we trace that all the way back to the militia on the Mayflower. So it's a little, it's a little intimidating, I won't lie, to be sort of the next one that kind of carries that on. But it's also kind of awesome, that there's sort of this family heritage. And it was a really special experience, me and my daddy sitting down and kind of going generation by generation, what does that look like and what has that time been? But I think that the military life shaped me pretty significantly. Both as a young person, having, international experience and sort of a global perspective from a young age, I think helped in huge ways. And many American youth don't get that. Many Americans in general don't get that kind of exposure. So I felt very fortunate for that. But I'm a tech nerd, so I'm an engineer by education, and that was at the University of Michigan. Go Blue. And
Go Bucks.
Go Blue. And we, really kind of anything advanced technology is very inspiring to me. And so that started out with fighter jets when I was in the Air Force. But then when I became a citizen airman and I was doing basically anything that was advanced technology, mostly supporting the warfighter. So that was alternative energy, robotics platforms, advanced performance ground vehicles, just kind of a smattering of research and development related technologies in support of DoD, high-end compute power, think like high fidelity simulator systems or niche data centers, to support AI and other. And then I found Solyco, and at Solyco Capital, we invest in a ton of really cool technologies. Part of our thesis is to invest in disruption, regardless of what market, industry, or vertical it's in. And so being a part of that has been really exciting for me too. So generally speaking, military background, technology nerd, and operator would be ways, I think, to define me.
I love it. At what point did you make your transition to Solyco? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's been about 6.5 years. And that was I was brought into a previous company to be the succession plan for the founder and CEO. Come take over my company and run it and, make it your company instead. And we were trying, a couple of years in, trying to shore up that transition plan. And we met our founder and managing director, John Garcia, as an advisor who could potentially help us, again, just shore up that deal, make sure that the structure is sound and things like that. And going through that process, John says to me, "Hey, why don't you come work with Solyco?" And I was like, "Really? I don't know what any of that is. I'm an engineer who builds high performing teams that execute against a mission to deliver something to, mostly to the warfighter. So, capital markets, venture capital, capital stack, like financial, shenanigans." I was like, this is not my life. I don't know what any of those things are. And he goes, no. Really, the investment into our portfolio of companies, being able to reap the benefit of that is making sure that those assets stay really high performing, and that's an operator's role.
Mm-hmm.
So there's really kind of a key, I guess, gap that I was filling by bringing that talent to the team.
Yeah.
So really excited to find it. And, it's funny, as I was starting, I say this when I, go back and do presentations at the university or when I'm talking to students, this was never my path, when I was a young person, to say that, yeah, I'm going to go someday in the future and be responsible for entrepreneurship and, investing in from a venture perspective and things like that. But if I could have devised really the perfect job for me, this would be it, so it's just interesting how your path kind of curves and gets you to where it's kind of a good place for you.
So you and I must be on the same wavelength, because a lot of mentees, one of the biggest pieces of advice they ask for at these events and just throughout our ecosystem is knowing when to pivot, knowing like what feels right and what doesn't, because the longer that you go into one role, the more likely you're going to be successful in that role. But also there's opportunities that come other places, and you kind of have to have this delicate balance. Can you speak to us about like what are some of those things that you saw that helped you make that decision?
Yeah, sure. So two things come to mind when you're talking about that. One is advice and the second is pivots. And so I guess I'll say three things then, because there's two things of advice I really would love to give. So I spoke at, I was invited to speak at the awards ceremony in Michigan for all of the ROTC students. It happens, once a year. And as I'm like, man, what could I tell these folks that's going to mean to them, something to them? And so I talked to them about my perspective of the value of military service, like what you get back from that and why that's so important. But then the second thing that I talked to them about was about finding your own personal why. What are you inspired by? And then be seeking that out, regardless of what that looks like. Make that your North Star. And so for me, I'm inspired by three things. The first of those is advanced technology, like really cutting edge tech. If I'm just kind of doing something a little bit that's, or nothing technology related at all, I get very bored very fast. So inspired by advanced technology. The second is this has been, part of my family heritage. Service is a key component. So for me, how am I making the world a better place? And ideally, how am I using advanced technology to make the world a better place? Pairing those things together is very inspiring for me. And then the third thing that's very inspiring for me is the autonomy to be exceptional. I want to have the freedom to be really, really good at whatever it is that I'm doing, and to be valued for that. Not threatened by, or how do I control that? Or, we really need to rein in Sarah, like how do we release Sarah? Because this is amazing. I want that, autonomy.
Yeah.
And those three things together are incredibly inspiring to me and make me the best version of me that I can be. And I did not know those things were my things, 25 years ago, but I do know that those things are my things now. And so as I'm seeking, ways to deploy my time and talent, it has to align with those three things, or I'm not going to do it.
Seems like Solyco is a great place of influence leadership as opposed to control leadership.
Yeah, for sure.
It allows you to kind of bloom out.
For sure.
Have you been in any jobs where you were in a control-based environment that like wasn't good for you? Can you speak to that? And like, what was that like?
Yeah, for sure. But I do also want to go back to the pivot.
Go. Sorry.
No, that's okay. You didn't, but this is good.
You're pivoting me back to the pivot.
I'm pivoting you back to the pivot. But before I do the pivot, I'll answer this question. And this question was, what was this? Oh, control environments. So yes, two instances that I'll recall, and this started very early. So leaving the military and going into corporate life, I started as a consultant at Booz Allen Hamilton. So, a senior consultant. And I think was our title, or associate or senior associate, something along those lines. I don't even remember now what that title was, but regardless, that was very time-based. Your value equals how much time you bill. And you bill it in a super obnoxious way every 15 minutes. And all I'm thinking about is, have I just dissected my life into like 15-minute increments every single day, all the time? And the minutia of trying to justify your existence by FaceTime, is miserable. And that felt very controlling and horrible. And then, one of the companies that I was leading in later, after, because being a consultant was not a good jam for me. Like, let me give you all of my heart and soul on all the things that we should be doing to like be better and to grow and whatever. And then somebody else is responsible for executing that, and they suck. So it's just miserable. Consultants was not for me. I needed the ownership aspect. And that's not fair. It's not that they suck, but
No, I like that.
they make their own determinations related to things, and sometimes they're great and sometimes they're not as great. But I needed the ownership, like to own my own destiny. But a second environment that was really bad from a control perspective was just pretty authoritarian, and kind of antiquated business structure. Like, thou shalt wear this, and thou shalt be here from 9 to 5, and, thou shalt, just a lot of thou shalts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I always think that is a very immature way to lead, because I think it speaks to the fact that you are trying to control the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you set expectations for people, they're going to rise to those expectations. And so if your expectations are you're a moron and I have to tell you how to be exactly prescribed, then you're going to get that. You get what you incentivize. And so I never want to lead in that way. And I absolutely don't want to be in that environment, because I think that the kinds of caliber of people, who are successful in that space generally tend to be limited, and they limit themselves than when you're in a place that's really encouraging growth and exploration and exceptionalism, right? Mm-hmm. And so, I have been in a couple of places that were not super successful that way. Let me tell you the pivot and then ask your next question.
Go ahead, sorry.
So you asked earlier, what's an example of a pivot that you've had to take? So one of the things that was incredibly challenging for me was my transition from the military to corporate life. Because when I was first starting in ROTC, I'm like, I don't know that this military jam is for me. And then I had an incident that sort of flipped the script for me. And I'm like, I'm going to be a superstar in the military. This is amazing. And I was like, I'm going to go all the way. I'm going to be a general. I'm going to make a career of this. This is like this huge impact. And I was just under 6 years in active duty. And my second son was born. And there's never a good time if you're trying to plan when to have kids to say, oh, well, there will be this perfect time. That's just not facts.
Yeah.
If you want to have a family, you just have a family. And I did not want my children raised in daycare. And I was really struggling with the amount of time that we had as a family together versus, where I thought that there were other people having these huge, impactful, influential roles in my kids' development. And so I said, with my husband, we have to decide, both of us cannot be in the military the way that we are and have a family. And in the end, we made the decision for me to leave active duty. And, a little bit of marital non-bliss. A couple years later, he was like, dude, I'm out of here. I don't want to be in the military anymore. And I'm like, oh, why didn't you say that 2 years ago? Like, you should have left, not me.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're past all that now. That's a long time ago.
Sure.
But that was a door closed to me, like closed on my heart, where I was like, oh my gosh, it's like I'm giving up. Like, I know what I can be. I know how I can influence and lead. I know what an impact and difference I can make. And I am saying no to that opportunity. And man, like all of the feedback that I got, we joke in the military, you get mentored, welcome or unwelcome, you get basically told what it is that you should do in a way that's couched as advice, but it's really not. And I was just getting it, just litanies of like, what are you doing? Where are you going? What is wrong with you? This is the wrong decision, over and over and over again. And in the end, I knew what was most important to me. What I wouldn't be able to accept later, looking back, is if I would have been a really terrible mom. And to me, time equaled better than not time, in terms of how I would parent. And so that was a decision that I made. What's interesting about that is I stayed in the reserves, and which was awesome because that gave me that connection to the military that was so important to my heart. But I then transitioned to corporate, And I became this incredibly valuable asset because I was young enough that I could still be trained corporate, but I was old enough that I had all of the leadership, like professional military education and leadership that you get as a company grade officer, as a young officer in the military. And so I became this incredibly valuable asset that was embraced and supported and developed more. That really allowed me, I think, to take this journey that got me to where I'm at now, which feels, very successful. And had that decision not happened, which I thought was like destroying my world, today would never have happened. And these other opportunities would not have come. And I think that that mindset is hard to have in the moment of those tough decisions.
What is that mindset, would you say? Like just kind of following your heart no matter what?
Well, what is your North Star?
Yeah.
And, what are you inspired by? And what are things that, when you have to, sometimes you're making decisions about what am I going to regret versus, what could I live with?
Yeah.
And that's what that decision was for me. It was like, what will I regret? I will regret not being a good mom to my parents. What can I live with? Well, I can live with sacrificing, professionally what I thought was my path.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're making decisions based on, being true to that, I think it's a much better, your path will present itself to you, even if you could never have envisioned that that's what it is.
Totally.
And, there's all the very goofy, sayings that people will have about, one door closed is one door open. And, you just want to roll your eyes in the middle of it. And you're like, but my heart's breaking and I'm miserable and I'm stressed out and I can't see it. And it just feels like all of these tough decisions. And when you're in the heat of the battle right then, it's really hard to see that. But it is absolutely true that if you stay true to those things that are important to you, you will find it.
Yeah. One of my favorite things to ask entrepreneurs is, what was the hardest thing that you have been through that led to the most success? Would you say that is the answer? Like that whole story of kind of pivoting into motherhood?
Well, to date, I would say maybe, but I'll also say that I'm in some really challenging times right now. In this prescribed path, it starts to get checklisty, and you just kind of have to check the box with this thing. And once you check the box, then you're ready and prepared for the next level, even if you're totally not.
Yeah.
And people get hyper concerned about, if I don't do this thing, then I'm not going to be looked at for promotion to be able to kind of get to the next level, do the next thing. That's why the prescription is bad. So Colonel Halcyon was talking to us in this, we were having a luncheon. She was our guest speaker. And she's like, people are going to tell you that you need to do this job, or you need to have this focus, or you need to eat this thing. And she's like, that's all crap, except she cursed at us. And she said, that's all bullshit. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody just cursed at us, like in a professional environment. And, for the younger here in this audience, you might be like, what is that about? But in the Wayback Machine, you just didn't do that. You especially didn't do that, in a professional setting. Like that was a big deal, to use curse words. And so she did. And so I was paying a lot of attention to it because like that means something. Like that's almost like a big foot stomp, that you do. And so I was like, okay, great. She's like, here's what I'll tell you. She said, if you do whatever job it is that you're doing right now, and you do 110% of your effort at that job, and you have an amazing attitude while you're doing it, she said, then the next job, you pick whatever you want to. And she said, and you'll get some opportunities because of this attitude that you've had and this work ethic that you've had. And then don't pick what you think is the thing that you should be doing, because it's the next thing on your path. Pick the next thing that you're inspired by and that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And she said, and then in that job, give 110% effort and have a really amazing attitude. And she says, and then all these opportunities are going to be open to you. And she said, and don't do the next thing that you think you should do. Do the next thing that you really want to do, that you're inspired by. And then she said, and that's the way that you find this path to progression. She says that it has nothing to do with, are you doing exactly the thing that they tell you that you're supposed to? You're supposed to have a career broadening assignment. You're supposed to have an assignment where you lead this many number of people. You're supposed to have an assignment where you do this. She's like, oh, that's crap. She's like, you just go do whatever it is that you're doing and kill it. She says, and if you have a job that turns out to be like a suck job, she's like, you kill it at that too. Yeah. And she uses an example, a young airman who was literally, the waste removal person for aircraft. So her job was that I'm going to suck out all of the human waste that's coming in these aircraft, and it's nasty and gross. And then she's got to clean all of those, things and facilities and whatever. And she's like, yep, I get to get up today and I get to serve. And, I've got this amazing attitude, and, making jokes about like what her job is, and, this camaraderie focus, and just always about how else can I help and what more can I do. And I'm like, wow. And so when I think about what a difference that made for me personally, is always the things that I talk about is, giving all of yourself to whatever that you're doing. Otherwise, why do it? Yeah. And then have an amazing attitude while you do it. And I use the language relentless positivity. I will talk about a lot, which is different than reckless enthusiasm. But it's this idea that you will find the path to yes, and that you're going to work to get there, and plan to get there. And negativity is toxic, and it kills things, and it's terribly viral. And what you need to do instead, is combat with energy and enthusiasm. And I'll tell you, there's this function in your brain that, we don't know how to define. I don't know what the percentages are that they say now. It's like, we're not really sure what's going on inside your brain, but like we've mapped this portion of your brain and we know exactly what's happening in these areas, but in these areas we really don't know. I think that's all about the power of intention and will and desire and drive. And I think you can manifest things into successfully happening if you determine with your mind that they're going to happen. And I think this is this whole relentless positivity. I think this attitude of yes. Yeah, I love it. And I think the way you can do that, this mindset of how do I give 110% and how do I have an amazing attitude while I do it, I honestly think it is all foundational to the idea of serving. Yeah. And when people are very focused on what is me, what is me, what is me, I think you are way less likely to be able to do those things than when you're thinking about how can I help you? How can I help you? Yeah. And that what is it for me? What is it for me is so short-sighted, because in the end, the more you give, the more you get. Right. Because everybody wants to help.
It's actually like more selfish in a positive way to like help people more.
It actually kind of is, right? Because in the end, you're gonna just get way more back. Yeah. It's really impactful that way.
Yeah, I love that.
I actually think that generational related qualities or evaluations on how generations will behave is fascinating. And there's a lot of research and study that goes into that. Like, just like you can have different personalities of a culture or an organization, where you can kind of define those and analyze those. I think that's true as a grouping, within a generation. But I don't think that that's always true as an individual within a generation. And so, one of the things that I would say about that is that although I think that that's fascinating, I think that personality, preference profiles are also fascinating. I think the cultural profiles, that mirror the individual personality profiles, or like what is an organization's culture and profile, and defining those. I think all of that's fascinating. And I think it gives you really interesting insights into how you can be most effective with that group. But I don't think it's an end-all be-all that accurately defines everything all the time. And so my first thing would be to keep that in mind, to not expect that everything is going to be exactly as that, prescribed thing has been defined. To recognize that there will be variances, and that's good. And to recognize that an individual within that grouping is also totally going to have variances. And I think that that's also good. That said, I think there's a lot that you can leverage in terms of how you lead and how you interact, knowing what some of the preferences and characteristics and qualities are of whatever group that happens to sit in, or individual that happens to sit inside a group is. And as a leader, I think my job is to adjust to the needs of the person I'm interacting with, not to expect them to adjust to me, because I'm the leader.
Yeah.
And so clearly I've demonstrated that I have some capability, to be able to drive that maybe somebody hasn't been able to demonstrate. So how is it possible that I should expect them to adjust to be able to accommodate me? You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So it's this idea, there's a whole leadership model associated with that concept, that I think his first name is Kevin, but Blanchard came up with, the situational leadership model, which is just to analyze what is the level that, a follower is at, and then what should you do to match your leadership style to their level of, followership. But I think it's a little bit broader than that. I think you should be able to, adjust to the needs of who you're interacting with. For instance, I am an extrovert, a big one. And so I talk out loud to think, but I work with a lot of introverts because that is a group definition for engineers. It's not true for every engineer, but as a collective, they tend to be an introverted group. And so because of that, I know that I need to shut up sometimes. I know that I need to invite opinion from those, otherwise they might not ever offer it because they're thinking all kinds of things inside their head, but they're never going to say something until they're convinced that it's the thing that they actually think is right. Whereas I'll say all kinds of stuff because saying it out loud helps me think about what it is. But in the end, that might be confusing to somebody else because they're like, well, wait a minute, which one of those things is it?
Yeah.
So just as an example, I have to adjust to who I'm interacting with.
One thing I wanted to go back to, and this will probably be my last question, but conflict in servant leadership, and there's these inherent needs that we have to take care of while we're serving. How do you manage and balance taking care of others versus just having innate needs for yourself? In that it's like a nonstop conflict, probably, right? Of do I do this for them, or but what about me?
Yeah.
Or you just change your brain completely to only care about others.
I'll tell you. Well, I don't think it's possible to do that. I think it's possible to change your brain to only care about others, but I don't think that you can ever change the requirements of just being a human, where you have to have self-care.
Yeah.
I just don't think physiologically that I have that power.
Yeah.
I have the power to do a lot. I can determine a lot, but I think there are still things that I have to be able to do. I still have to be fit. I still have to worry about nutrition. I still have to hydrate. I still need to have balance to be effective. And I define balance, and I encourage people to think about balance. People are like, oh, work-life balance, and I'm like, I think of more fitness, and I like to talk about mentally, spiritually, physically, and emotionally fit. And if you dedicate time to be fit in those areas, that is going to drive you to balance. It's not about, am I working a certain hours of time and am I not working a certain hours of time? I think it's about, do you have balance across these fitness areas?
Yeah.
Those are the four for me. I have always struggled. That's actually a piece of advice that I also got when I was very young, was this idea of balance, including a spiritual component. And I really appreciated that. And I have since broadened it to the four. But, that was an early piece of advice from a mentor who didn't look anything like me, but looked like me on the inside. I think that I have tended to be just really wretchedly awful at never prioritizing myself, always prioritizing others, to the point where I deliver less because I'm so unwell, unbalanced, if you will. It's an issue. It's always an issue. If my husband watches this, he'll be laughing right now. So I think that I'm consistently having to remind myself of that. in those 4 different kind of components. But I did learn, I had some executive coaching, earlier in my career, and I learned something that was a tool to use that I had never really thought about before. I thought that most requests were yes or no answers, and I really am terrible at saying no. And I don't think it's because I'm a people pleaser. I think it's because I'm a servant. And saying yes means I'm serving you. And my love language, if anybody's ever done the little 7 love languages, my love language is acts of service. This is how I demonstrate that I care about you, how you mean something to me, is by doing something for you, serving. And I also want to be reciprocated that way. The number one thing that my husband can do is take time off my day by doing something for me. And he knows that, and he does a lot of things. He's amazing in that way, right? But I think that I learned this cool tool that it's not just yes or no, and that there are actually 4 responses, and yes and no are 2 of them. But there is also this commit to commit, where you say, I will give you an answer at such and such a time, where you have some time to think and analyze and review. And then I think there's also a no but or a yes but. And I think they're kind of the same. You can say it either way. Where I can't do exactly what you've asked me to do, but I can do this. I can't do what you said by tomorrow, but I can do that by next Friday. Or I can't do all of the things that you asked, but I can do thing 2 and thing 5. And that was just liberating for me to recognize that I'm not telling you no, but I'm telling you what I can do, because, and this is something I've always known, when you say yes to something, you are saying no to something else. And so you have to really think about what is it that you've already made commitment to, yourself included. And one of the things that I think back to when I had that pivot moment for me, going down this military career path versus choosing something else, is that by saying yes to both of us staying in the military, I was saying no to what my boys needed at that moment. And that was never going to be okay for me.
Totally.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, I think that's how, right now, that's how I try to balance this idea of how do I take care of myself so that I can serve other people. Because you're right, there's always tension there.
Sure.
And there always will be tension there. But you have to be careful to not get sucked into this self-care priority thing all the time, and I think you have to be careful not to get sucked into this sort of self-pity.
Yeah.
You end up making things worse for yourself by doing that. And once there's this awesome thing in the Hunger Games. It's in the book, but it's also in the movie, and I like the interaction in the movie where I'm trying to remember what the name of the character is, but nobody cares. You guys will remember. But Katniss, the main character, is interacting with another one of the heroes or another one of the victors, and he says to her, Katniss, it's better, not to fall to pieces, because it's so much harder when you fall to pieces to build yourself back up out of that. It's much easier to just not let yourself fall apart to begin with. And I think about that all the time too. It's so much easier to just not let yourself get so over-focused on self. Mm-hmm. Because once you do, it's really hard to come back out of that and think then about others.
Yeah.
And when you're thinking about others, you don't really have time for worry about what your own personal, issues are.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for the time today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for...
I'm really looking forward to next Thursday.
I am too.
Yeah.
We're so excited. Thanks for the space. It's beautiful. This conversation was fantastic, and we'll look forward to hanging out next Thursday.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate you.
Yeah, take care.
This is awesome.